Privacy is really just for criminals and conspiracy theorists, right? Wrong. In today's digital age, privacy is the very foundation of your freedom. In this episode, we talk with Gabriel Custodiet about why protecting your data is the key to living life on your own terms. From the dangers of constant surveillance to practical steps for reclaiming control, this is a must-watch and must-listen for anyone who values true freedom. This episode is brought to you by Covered.io, an options trading tool that we use to generate extra income to free up time so we can pursue projects like this podcast. This is the Covered Call, the podcast where we explore the journey towards true freedom. In each episode, we bring on guests that have charted their own course towards more freedom, more contentment, and more impact in their lives. Hey, Gabriel, welcome to episode 5 of the Covered Call. Here again today with my co-host Jason, and he's in Leipzig. I'm in Dallas, Texas. Gabriel is in undisclosed location. Gabriel is a privacy expert, I would say, authored several books on the subject, and Jason and I are absolutely not. So we're here today to learn all there is to know that you can, at least in 60 to 90 minutes, about how do you live a free life while monitoring your privacy online and offline, and how are these two themes connected in the first place. Welcome, Gabriel. Thank you so much for taking the time. It's an honor and a privilege to meet you.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here. Happy to talk about everything you just mentioned. And yeah, privacy is a very useful tool, but also just a means to an end of the more important things like freedom and lifestyle freedom and all the rest.
Say, doing what you do, if you were at a cocktail party, how would you introduce yourself to, let's say, friends of close friends who do not know you yet?
Wow, the tricky question. Friends of close friends who do not know me yet. So I'm Gabriel Custodiet, and I talk about things such as privacy, cybersecurity, some of the bigger issues that pertain to them, geopolitical concerns and things of this sort. I do it through a podcast, and I have an online brand. I wrote a couple books, and I kind of post things regularly on social media. I'm just trying to kind of build a community that is interested in things like privacy and freedom and a lot of the offshoots of these sorts of things, and to, most importantly, monetize it, because doing anything for free is immoral. And so that's kind of this quick summary.
Yeah, that was a really good one. I mean, all right, so the thing that really stood out for me, besides all the privacy stuff, was a strong statement, right? Saying that whatever you do for free is immoral. I think I might know where you're coming from, but would you mind elaborating for us?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. One thing that you have to realize about where I spend some of my time is in the deep digital privacy circles of the internet. And okay, I will give the internet people, the cypherpunks from the 1980s basically gave us digital privacy. They were huge. They were really important. They developed encryption. They therefore developed all the things that allowed us to have things like torrenting and Bitcoin and online privacy and encryption and encrypted messaging apps and all the rest. But these people from the start had a little bit, obviously there was a liberty leaning, but there was also a communist strain to this group of people. And some of them were kind of middle finger up to the system, which, as probably you and your audience knows, a lot of people mistakenly blame capitalism for that, right? This abstract concept of capitalism that didn't exist until Marx told us that it is an actual thing. It's not a system, it's the absence of a system. And so there are a lot of people in these online privacy circles who are very anti-corporation and who basically do not point the finger at the right person, right? Which is government. And sure, corporations are in bed with the government in many cases, and they have means to harm our privacy. But in the end, I think we need to be pointing the finger in the right direction. And so there is a communist strain to a lot of the people that I certainly deal with. And what happens with them is they might have an interesting idea, they might have an interesting website or a project, but they're very anti-monetization. And so what happens? Well, they get burned out. they have to get a real job, right? These anti-corporate people, these anti-system people have to go and get a 9 to 5. Okay, that's not very radical, is it? And so what happens to a lot of these people is they fizzle out. Whereas if they had rightly taken money for their time and found a way to fund their endeavors, they would be able to contribute more to the world. And so I think that people should be monetizing their efforts so that they can continue to do those efforts. And doing so for free is depriving the world of a very valuable service. So that's kind of my thoughts in a nutshell.
100% agree. I've never phrased it, I guess, so black and white, but I completely agree. The need to feed yourself will trump all the idealism that you potentially could work on, right? So you have to find a way to do both in a meaningful way, which I think is very much at the core of the struggle for a lot of people trying to find the thing that, this ikigai concept, like find what you're good at, what the world needs, and what people are willing to pay for. That's not really ikigai, but that's kind of how I would paraphrase it. Gabriel, going back to the start, your work emphasizes the importance of privacy in a world that's becoming increasingly transparent. You could even say invasive. What was the moment or experience that first opened your eyes to the importance of privacy? Where did your story begin?
Yeah, I think a lot of us, and especially me, had this idea of, hey, I have all this personal information, all this personal data, all these ID cards, all these kinds of things, right? Government name, and I had this kind of possessiveness about it. And as I got deeper kind of into traditional social media and living a normie lifestyle, I realized, hey, it just didn't sit right with me. And I just started reading some books about digital privacy and all of the third parties that have access to our data and what ends up happening with all that data and how all that data can be used to harm you in certain ways, right? If you have somebody who's trying to come after you, or you have, obviously I came to this from a kind of a libertarian perspective where the more information is about you, the more your government can know about you and control you and all the rest. And so none of that really sat right with me. And so I just kind of went down the proverbial rabbit hole of trying to be more extreme about privacy. And I found it quite rewarding. And maybe not everybody needs to go that extreme route, but I just found the more I did it, the more I started saying, hey, does this company really need to know this about me? No. So I'll use another company, or I will tell them that that's none of their business and they don't need to have that data. And of course, as I also went into this, I started realizing exactly what happens with all this information. And there's a $10 trillion cybercrime industry in the world, for example. And that basically exists, $10 trillion of cybercrime. It exists because we have so many vulnerabilities that we have trusted a company. Okay, let's say we trust our dentist. We go to our dentist and we say, or they give us the iPad, right? And they say, hey, we need your name, we need your address, your phone number, all this stuff. So you give it to them. Well, the dentist didn't create that app, right? They use a third party. They use a third party app, and that company has thousands of vulnerabilities. They're called employees, right? They might slip up here and there. There are many attackers who can, hack that company. And you have data breaches and leaks and all the rest. And before you know it, your name and your address and your phone number end up on the dark net. And people collect this information, they sell it, they share it, and they use it for scams. And people around the world wake up trying to scam people every day. There's entire industries in this in India, in North Korea. That's how North Korea actually funds a lot of its government is through scamming Americans and Westerners through this data. So just kind of going down the rabbit hole, I realized the vulnerabilities. I became very possessive of my data, and I found that other people were interested. So I thought I could go the extreme route and kind of profit from it and show other people how they could also kind of take their privacy more seriously, go as extreme as they want to go, and ultimately protect themselves and the sphere around them, which is the bulwark of individualism.
I love it, man. This connects strongly with a theme. So in your books, you talk about privacy as a foundation for freedom, right? If you don't have privacy, then freedom is not really possible. Could you share your perspective on how privacy enables personal freedom, especially today where data is very much currency, right? All these free apps, there's a saying, if you're not paying for the product, you're the product. So I guess said quickly, how does privacy enable freedom?
Yeah, let's start with the big picture. So in the cosmos, all right, we zoom in on Earth, this ball that is hurtling through the universe at thousands of kilometers per hour right now, and we have human beings. And when a human being is born, they and they alone have access to their private mind. Okay, so Descartes tells us that the one thing that we're certain of is that we are thinking things, right? We are thinking individuals, and we have access to this private sphere called the human mind. And we have all these thoughts, some of them weird and bizarre, and some of them that we don't want to share with people. And so that's kind of what we call privacy, right? Privacy is built into the universe. Individualism is built into the universe. And so all the Marxists, all the collectivists who have these bizarre ideas about how individualism is a social construct, it's the most bizarre thing you can imagine, right? Because this is baked into the cake, individualism. And the reason we have individualism is because of that privacy, right? We have this sphere around us, okay, our private mind, and then we try to extend that to having a private dwelling, right? Coke, the famous saying, our friend Coke from England says, "A man's house is his castle," right? So you have this domain, this private sphere that you try to also build where you can do what you want, right? You can run experiments in your basement. You can have radical conversations with people. You can discuss topics. Maybe you take up a podcast and put it in your earphones, and you listen to some kind of off the cuff or unusual podcast to get ideas that you wouldn't normally have got. So this requires privacy in order for this to happen. If you think of the great novel about surveillance, 1984, what sends the protagonist on this journey to uncover the evil of his society is he has this little sliver of space in his apartment, which is away from the camera. And it's only in that little sliver of space where he knows he's not being surveyed. He can't commit face crime, right? Where your face reveals this split second questioning of the regime. It's only in this little area that he can start to pencil in his journal these radical thoughts that will allow him to build to bigger thoughts and allow him to build a personality and just have these ideas that would allow him to be a free person. So privacy is really the tool, one of the main mechanisms, the mechanism that we're given from birth to allow us to pursue freedom and to appreciate freedom. So that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, and so you say having radical conversations, or having radical thoughts, but this is very relative, right? So I grew up. I'm German. I grew up in Germany. I've spent tons of time though in Texas, going to the university here. I'm now building a business here, and so many things that are commonplace that people talk about or think about in Texas would be considered quite radical in Germany. For example, the ownership of a gun. And so I guess I'm saying this because anything that the regime deems so will be called radical if you don't have privacy, right?
Yes.
Is that the context in which you're referring to it, or how do you think about it?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, that's how are innovations made, right? Why is the West responsible for what 99% of the inventions that we have? It's this kind of individualistic culture that is okay questioning authority, that is very supportive of private property as a way to separate ourselves from the rulers. And yeah, so certainly that is what I'm certainly following what you're saying. I completely agree. And radical meaning anything that goes against the mainstream, goes against what the powers that be are saying is true, which is not always inherently untrue, but there can be a lot of good certainly that comes out of radical conversation and pushing against authority. So yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess having any kind of authentic communication with another human being is not really possible if you constantly have to filter what am I allowed to say, right? Like I think it's very hard to connect deeply on a human level if you can't be candid. And I mean, I know it for myself, right? How do they say this? I have lots of opinions, but I hold them very loosely. You know what I mean? So I'm eager to be convinced. If more truth comes to light, I'm eager to change my mind, and because I'm interested in the truth. So that's why, therefore, I'm interested in learning and meeting people, and having open and honest conversations. And in a space that's not private, it's very difficult to do, I think, because
That's true.
Yeah, you have to
Yeah.
constantly monitor. Oh, am I allowed to say this? What are they going to think if I say this?
Right.
So this is
yeah. And you know, an extension of this in the private world is having pseudonyms and sock puppet accounts. Sometimes they call them, but it's kind of like Oscar Wilde said: "Give a man a mask, and he will tell you the truth." And you know, the internet was built for pseudonyms. It was not. It was never built for people to be using their real identity. That was anathema to the early internet culture. Right? No, I'm not telling you what my real name is, who I am. Right? I'm this person on the internet, and we can have these crazy discussions because I know that I have a mask. I'm wearing a mask, and that is crucial for us to explore all these radical ideas. And that is why the powers that be wants to require you to sign up for services with your real name. All this KYC, right? Know your customer requirements for many services and accounts these days is the idea is pretty clear. If we attach this to your real name, you're not going to think the same things. You're not going to say the same things. You're not going to follow the same accounts because that which gets surveyed gets controlled. When you're surveyed, you become less of a person that you would otherwise be.
Gabriel, on that note, right, what happens when people at large in the public believe that they're wearing a mask and so they act in a free way or more free way, and little do they know everything they're doing or saying is being recorded, right? Like, I'm not sure, but I have my suspicions that, you know, when you use a messaging app or a free email account, right, that you might think, hey, I'm just sending an email to Lovis, right? And I might put in some stuff that you don't want the whole world to know. You know, you can say, hey, I saw this really weird thing on the internet. It's interesting. It's scary, right? And here I am thinking I'm operating behind a mask, right? And actually, who knows? Maybe in a few years to come, I get pulled up in front of a court and I get shown these messages that I've written in that day and time, you know, and then I find myself in a lot of trouble. So it's like the opposite side of that coin, right? That 1984 characters. What if there was another camera there and he just didn't know, right?
Yeah, this is a good point. And you know, one thing I do in my book, Privacy and Utopia, is I try to define privacy. And there's this whole really unnecessary academic conversation of people trying to define privacy over the last decades, and it's really a modern term, privacy. It's not really used until the 20th century, and I have my ideas on why that is, mostly because we didn't really need to worry about it as much. But privacy, right? Your privacy can be invaded even when you're not aware of it, right? It doesn't require you to know that you're being watched for you to be losing privacy. And what you're saying is absolutely correct. So let's say that there is a guy who has a divorce, and there's a court proceeding about who's going to have custody of their daughter, and then the judge has, or the court proceeding brings up, hey, we need to investigate this guy a little bit. Okay, well, how would you investigate that? So how would you investigate someone and who they are? Well, I do some open source intelligence gathering myself. So here's what I would do. Let's subpoena this guy's Amazon account. Okay. So what happens when we subpoena his Amazon account? Okay, what do we see here? All right, he bought some sex toys. Interesting. He bought a book on magic mushrooms. All right. Well, I can, if I'm a lawyer, just with those couple things, I can present a pretty reasonable case that, hey, this guy, let's present this to the jury in the most reasonable way possible, the most convincing way. Hey, this guy is not fit to be to have custody of this little girl. Look at what he purchases. Look at what he does on his private time. So absolutely, the things that you are not aware of now can come back to bite you. And there's all kinds of scenarios that I could explain, whether that's your Amazon Alexa in your house, which has been used, which has been given to law enforcement to basically take things out of context. Like imagine the things you say in your house or at your friend's house when you think nobody is listening. So yeah, you really have to be proactive about this and realize that things can come back to bite you later on.
Have you watched the TV series from HBO called Westworld?
I watched the first season of that.
Yeah, same. I didn't really like the second one, so I stopped. But I watched the first one, and if memory serves me right, the premise was to bring these people into this world where they could do whatever they liked, aka wear in another way wear a mask, right? And they could do whatever they liked without consequence, right? And little did they know. Correct me if I'm wrong, because it's been a long time since I watched it. But little did they know there were, their data was being collected about them, how they reacted to certain circumstances, what did they do when they had absolute power, etc. Right?
Yeah, I think that's right. And so there's all kinds of depravity that these people commit on these robots, which are fairly realistic, humanoids.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so today I was messing around in the morning with Chat GPT, right? And then it just hit me like a ton of bricks that, in a way, when I'm in this world interacting with this AI, right, it's basically doing what they were doing in Westworld, right, on me, because I've given them an email account. They can link that email account to me. And so, whatever my curiosities are, whatever I'm asking them, whether I'm asking them about fitness, whether I'm asking them about smoking, it's all forming a profile about me, right? And even crazier still, their answers might actually, or the interactions with this AI might actually even shape who I am in years to come. I don't know how the whole thing will work in 10 years, right? And the way I lead my life and the decisions I make, to a certain extent, gets affected by the answers this AI spits out at me. And the whole time, it's just gathering information on who I am, as well as all the other millions and millions of users around the world that's using it, right?
You bring up a good point. And so at this point, I'll take it in a different direction and say, I'm an aspiring neo-Luddite, okay? But that doesn't mean that I have to reject all technology. I just put out a podcast episode today, and I had my colleague and I created a very nice looking image from Midjourney, which is an AI art tool. So obviously, I see the benefit of these things. I use ChatGPT as well, but when I do it, I'm using a VPN, which hides my traffic from the internet service provider. I use a lockdown browser, and I go directly to their website, and you can actually use it without an account. Now it's an older version of it apparently, but you can use it without an account. And so that's how I use these tools. Is there's always a workaround, and that's the great thing about digital technology is that there's and this is what the hackers have always known from the very beginning. Like the first people on the internet were the hackers. They realized, hey, we have all these systems. It runs on internet code, and we have all these tools that are being used potentially against us, but we can also use these to our benefit. So we can make use of some of these tools without linking it to our identity. And so that's why I don't take the black pill. I'm not a pessimist about these things, but I do want to be very cognizant of what email address do I have? Does that have my name in it? Does that connect to my identity? I try never to have an account when I use something. So I use more free and open source software that typically doesn't require any accounts. So that's kind of what I talk about, is how to make use of the fruits of modernity without falling prey to what I don't think are really great things, which are accounts and connectivity. I think this is a failed idea of progress. I don't think this is really progress when somebody shows me, hey, I have my Apple ecosystem and I have my Apple Watch and it connects to my phone, it connects to my computer. What I see in their life is chaos and distraction. And I don't have any of that. I'm laser focused. I don't have that interconnectivity because I care about my privacy. And I find I'm much more laser focused than they are. I understand the technology more than they do. And I think I have a better grasp of life, frankly, than some of these people who are using these really regressive technologies, is what I refer to them as. So I had to take that in a different direction.
No, I mean, I like that you turned it onto that path of, hey, how do we still live in this modern world while still protecting our privacy, right? Because that was one of the questions that I was going to ask. How can we? I guess we need to go to your website, right, Privacy Watchman, and find out more.
Go to my website, buy all of my products, put every one of them in the cart. Now, what I typically tell people to start is you just have to start understanding the systems around you. That's how it worked for me. Is okay. How does the internet work? And if you spend your life on the internet and your computer, you may as well learn a few things about them. And I realized, wait a second, can my internet service provider see what I'm doing? Yes, it can. How do I stop that? Well, just run a VPN. Okay, so I downloaded a VPN, and that's doing some good work for me. And then I said, well, Windows is closed source software, and for all we know, is be able to see everything we're doing. So I said, well, I need to get off of Windows. What can I do? Well, I'll transition to Linux. Linux is an alternative operating system. It is not surveying like Windows and Mac OS. You don't need an account to use it. And so I started using Linux and getting comfortable with it. And I can do everything that I can on Windows on Linux. So I just started to understand some of these systems and make some small life decisions to get around them. And I'm a much less surveyed and controlled person as a result. So it does start with understanding these systems and just finding a way around them every step along the way.
What would you say to somebody who says like, "Oh yeah, I want to be private, but I don't want to sacrifice all my convenience"? Like, how do you balance the need for privacy with the practicalities of what people would say modern life?
Yeah, well, I know what I consider convenient and not convenient is getting your account hacked. Convenient is using a Yahoo email address, which, by the way, all of Yahoo email addresses were compromised a few years ago. I had a client who had his entire Coinbase account stolen. Is that convenient? Right? Is being part of this $10 trillion of cybercrime statistic convenient? Is having spam phone calls of people trying to scam you every day? Is that convenient? Is getting your Skype account or your Xbox Live account shut down because you commit hate speech against Microsoft's terms and services and having your entire account shut down? Is that convenient? Is having your data shared between devices and then end up getting breached and shared on the darknet so that you get all these credit card scams happen to you, maybe some identity theft along the way? I don't consider that convenient. So I reject this idea that this technology that people use is convenient. What I consider convenient is to being at peace, knowing I'm in control of my data, knowing that I have more things offline, and I have the knowledge to defend that. But I would also say that you can have a fairly convenient life if you practice minimalism, if you use fewer tools and fewer accounts, if you organize your digital life. That starts with a password manager. It starts with having a lot of folders on your computer and just organizing things in a structured way. And when you kind of go about things that way and use my system, I think that your life is very convenient. And I have access to all of my data at my fingertips because it's all on my computer. Right? It's all offline data. That's pretty convenient. I don't need Dropbox. I don't need to be sharing between multiple computers. And when I do, there are easy ways to do that. So I have convenience. And I would say that a lot of things around us, there's a great bit of inconvenience just underneath the surface, just waiting to happen.
Very fair point. In a way, it reminds me of Nassim Taleb's Black Swan events, right? I mean, they're not his events, obviously, but it's essentially how do you survive? A good guide to surviving in volatile times is by making sure that these very rare but catastrophic black swan events don't completely wipe you out. And you just cited several of these. For the person at large, these might seem unlikely to happen. Maybe there's only a 1% chance that it'll happen, maybe less. But if it does, it can absolutely ruin you, right? So I guess everybody will be well advised to protect the tail risk, as they say.
Yeah, or even just on an ongoing basis, because you're right. What are your odds of having identity theft happen? 1%, let's say. But something like you use an ad blocker on your computer, and suddenly your browsing experience happens about 25% more quick. because you're not seeing all these ads on all the websites you go to. So there's a lot of tips and tricks in this kind of privacy lifestyle that can also enhance and make your regular day-to-day more convenient as well. So I wouldn't totally say that's just protecting for the 1% chance. There's a lot more ongoing benefit as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess, I mean, yes, it's layered, right? There's lots of like daily occurrence, but I guess why not do both if you can do both? So in a way, just perusing the body of work that you shared with us, you advocate for a self-sufficient lifestyle as a way to protect privacy, and whether that means learning practical skills or even using alternative financial systems like cryptocurrencies. But if somebody's completely new to this and feels overwhelmed with their to-do list, where would you recommend they get started to making a shift?
Yeah, so obviously, if you're just starting this, then you are totally free in your free time to read books and to educate yourself and learn. And that's the first way to do it. There's a lot of great resources about how to about how to learn how to do these things. So you don't have to say, hey, I need to leave my 9 to 5 job. Let me just do that. You can do that, but you can also spend some time learning. There's a lot of good books. One that I like is called Unscripted by MJ DeMarco. Talks about how to basically, get off of the 9 to 5. You can start reading about the tradition of freedom and liberty and what these things mean and how you can accomplish them. So that's the first part, is educating yourself. And then you can start to take action, right? Set up a side business of some kind. Find ways to make money that is not in your 9 to 5. And everywhere you look, there's money that is exchanging hands. The way I tell people is, hey, you are being hired to do something for somebody. Why would you not consider just doing that yourself, right? So then you start to think, okay, well, how would I get the customers myself? How would I, how do I have a website? And you can start just little building blocks of learning these systems and kind of piecing them together. Hey, what if I had a newsletter? Well, I don't have anything to talk about. What do I have interesting that I could tell people about? You start thinking about that. Maybe it's not so complicated. Maybe if you look at the popular videos on YouTube, some of them are sports highlights. And what these people do is, after a sporting event happens, they clip them together instantly for a highlight reel, and they release that as quickly as they can. And people make money just doing that. So it's creative in a sense, but it doesn't require any intellectual labor on their part. And then you start looking at, hey, what about e-commerce? Let me look at what are the best selling things on Amazon in every category. How do these people make these? What does it require to get an Amazon seller account? How would I market this? What would the costs be? You go to your local coffee shop. Hey, how do they sell this? Why do they sell it for this price? How much does the coffee cost? So when you get this freedom mindset, of course, you start looking at things in an entrepreneurial mindset, because you realize that, hey, I went to Walmart as growing up, and there were all these diversity of products. And now I realize that, hey, everybody has access to those same Chinese suppliers. It was just that Walmart had their own suppliers. And now people are undercutting that whole system by going to the suppliers themselves and selling that on Amazon as individuals. So just start to understand the system, kind of build on top of that, figure out how you'll get money so that you can escape the 9 to 5. You can have some financial freedom. Aristotle was pretty clear about this, that philosophy only begins when you have a good income and you have a certain freedom from not having to do the traditional day labor. Not that there's anything wrong with that. We should certainly exert effort and have a kind of grind mentality. But you do want to free yourself from the wage slavery, as sometimes it's called, and start to educate yourself and start to take the first steps to becoming a freedom, not just free-minded person, but a person who has actual freedom.
I'm also a huge MJ DeMarco Unscripted fan, so thank you for bringing that up. I think he puts it. He put a lot of the points that you just mentioned in really nicely organized form. It's almost readable like a manual, right? So it really resonated with me quite a bit.
It's a great book.
In a way, what you just described is a push for decentralization, right? So Walmart versus people selling on Amazon Marketplace or any other marketplace for that matter. Can you explain why decentralization is crucial for maintaining privacy and how it can empower an individual to live life on their own terms?
There's a famous story.
Gabriel, can I just add to that question from Lovis? because you mentioned the 9 to 5 earlier, right? And I really enjoyed that segment. I hope we can turn it into a short. um, but yeah, would you say, just a layer on top of what Lovis is asking about decentralization, in a way, when you step away from that 9 to 5, it is also a form of decentralization, right? You're no longer needing to, let's say, tap into this central nexus to get your sustainment, to get your salary, to get, put food on the table, right? So would you say getting away from that 9 to 5 is definitely one of the top priorities if you want to live and lead a more simple and private life?
I'd say at least freeing up some time for yourself to do that is crucial. And what a lot of people who get away from their job realize is that, hey, I need to work 80 hours now instead of 40 hours. But there's freedom in that. Obviously, you wake up, you don't have any place to be. You can do whatever you want. And like me the other day, I said, hey, I have this amazing Bitcoin satire video that I'm just going to work on for the next couple of days. I'm going to put it out there. It just came out of nowhere. Like I don't have to report to anybody. And because I don't, then yeah, the world kind of opens up for you. But in order to get that mindset, there's a great story about decentralization. There was a Soviet politician who visited, this was during the Cold War era, he visited some supermarket in Texas with his American handler. And the handler shows him the supermarket, and there's this immense variety of goods. And the Soviet guy is surprised, like, how do you have so many things in this store? And the way that the Soviet guy expressed it was, hey, how do you guys manage to have all these things in the store? And of course, he was totally missing the point. As Adam Smith tells us, and as other Hayek, I think, is the best person who has explained this in his essay on the use of knowledge in society. These centralized systems have a very big problem. They have to know everything about all of the nodes in the system because they are in control, right? They're the ones directing, and they're never going to have knowledge of what is most pertinent to that particular person in that little town somewhere out in the middle of nowhere. That handler, that centralized authority does not know what that individual should be doing. That individual himself knows when he wakes up what is best for him, what is in his own interest, okay, what's in his family's interest, what is in the interest of his community. And by allowing a decentralized quote unquote system to arise, what happens is people start pursuing self-interest, as Ayn Rand tells us, and as a result build amazing, incredible things. To the centralized collectivist person, this seems chaotic. This seems like chaos. And this is what H.G. Wells, who was a huge proponent of world government and all these sorts of things, this is what he said when he was writing at the beginning of the 20th century. He said, look, we cannot have this kind of laissez-faire system. We all need to have a common goal. We need to have a common plan. But they're missing the point entirely, right? And this is a hard thing to do, right? To have hands off, to say, hey, we're just going to let things go as they please. But what happens when you do that is you get Hong Kong, and you get the first century of America, where you had all these people doing kind of their own thing, and it produces a society which is actually pretty spectacular. And it's much better than these centralized authorities could do with their own limited abilities. And I kind of went off on a tangent there, but to kind of bring it back to your original point, by what I find about being self-employed is, as I was talking about, I start to think about how the systems work, how to undercut certain systems, how to do things for myself, right? When you're employed, you have one source of income, you have one client, that's your boss, okay? When you're self-employed, you have 5 clients, now you have 5 sources of income. And so you become your own little node, you become your own little center, you can start to kind of siphon off from the system. I don't want to say siphon off because that seems kind of a negative view, but you can start to kind of cobble things together in your own way. You're not dependent on this one figure for all of your ideas, your resources. You start to build up your own little town in a way. Maybe I'm not explaining that particularly well, but maybe you get my idea that an entrepreneur is somebody who is trying to be outside of the system, understand the system, and kind of build things in his own way with knowledge of how previously he would have relied on his boss for resources.
Yeah, well, makes complete sense to me, since I'm on that journey myself, right? And I mean, the point of the Covered Call podcast very much is to connect with people who are looking to increase their own freedom. And what else is freedom other than trying to find a way to be self-sufficient, to obviously work hard for what you earn, but to also get, I guess, be able to name your price rather than being a commodity in the labor market, and get paid a national average or a industry standard rate or whatever.
Right.
So that
And
for
also
sure.
to understand, right, the systems that you're in. So Lovis, I'm sure once you've dived into your current vocation as a entrepreneur, you just by definition you're forced to, and out of your own curiosity, your mind's switched on, right? Your whole being switched on to understanding all the systems that you're surrounded by, right? Whereas I think Gabriel made a good point that when you are employed, you've got one client and one source of income, right? And that client is your boss. So your whole worldview, in a way, is affected by that lens, right? Your boss is how you actually see the systems around you. You have to see it through that person you report to first, right? Whereas, yeah, I think what Gabriel was alluding to, when you're in the jungle, you're aware of everything, right? And through that, it might be quote unquote chaotic, but in a way it's more true, right? And you gain just such a deeper understanding, right?
Well, I would even say that stuff that looks chaotic on the surface is usually where there is the potential energy for spark. And spark, since I deal in innovation very practically, right? I'm an engineer and I help my clients invent new technology. I think that a bit of messiness, in the shop where the actual sausage is made is normal, because that's where well, it's actually required in a way, because that's how you also have like serendipitous findings, right? It's like, oh, we were testing this with this purpose in mind, but then we found out it actually can do these things really well. If you would have like this all top down, completely structured, everything nailed down to the minute kind of a plan, these like coincidental discoveries wouldn't even be able to happen, in my opinion. So I think you need a bit of the mess, right, to make something cool.
I agree. I'm just I think you've said that very well.
Shifting a little bit, Gabriel. So talking a bit about the legal and political landscape and how it impacts privacy. So I've shared that I'm an EU citizen, and there's a large body of work in English called the GDPR that allegedly is protecting me and pretty much really everybody's privacy in the world. Other than that, I mean, I don't ask you to comment on that specifically, but what emerging trends or other regulations do you see that are threats to personal privacy, or are there even any that you might say they would in fact make people more free and protect their privacy?
Yeah. So coming from the anarchist, I think you know where I'm going with this. I think that privacy is a bottom-up activity. I think that privacy can only exist when there is nobody trying to grant you privacy. And it goes back to centralization. If a government wants to give you privacy as a European citizen, it needs to know that you're a European citizen. And how does it know that? Well, you need to have your passport, you need to have your documents in order, it needs to know your name, address, et cetera, et cetera. You go to court, where, by the way, things get very exposed, right? You don't have much privacy pursuing the GDPR. Everybody gets exposed. I think that privacy exists when there are no laws, frankly. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I think pure privacy only exists in an anarchist society. Now, maybe we don't want to go that far, but I don't think that laws grant privacy. I can't imagine a law that would, because in order for the law to apply to you, you have already had to give up your privacy by becoming a citizen of that particular region or country, along with all the things that go along with that. And this is what you see in one of the most famous legal essays ever written. It's called The Right to Privacy in 1890. And you read it, and a lot of people get these emotions stir up in them. They're like, yeah, these guys are on the right track. We need a right to privacy. Well, what is this right to privacy of which these authors speak, one of whom would become a Supreme Court justice? Well, basically, they think that if somebody writes about you, takes a photo of you in public without your permission, then they're violating your right to privacy. Okay, well, how does this play out? Well, you get sued, you get taken to court, everybody's name is on the record, people's personal information gets exposed. Of course, you have to have already been a citizen of that country. You already have to be a denizen of that particular area. You already have to have given a lot of information for that right to privacy to apply to you. And by the way, that guy who is taking a photo of you in public, what about his rights to freedom and privacy, right? Can he not do things that he wants to do? And so I just find a whole contradiction in the idea of a right to privacy, privacy laws. I think that privacy exists when there are no laws being foisted upon us. Apple cannot give you privacy. Privacy exists when you're not using Apple's products. And the way, for example, that Apple tries to tell you that you have privacy is they say, hey, we're in control of your data. We protect it very well. We're not going to share that with anybody. Well, I mean, is that privacy? In a sense, sure. But privacy from Apple, not so much. And frankly, I would prefer to have privacy from Apple than many other entities. So I just think it's a great metaphysical question, but I do think that privacy exists only when we grant it to ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, but so just comparing the data octopuses, right, the data krakens that are Google, Apple, and the likes. The fact that the iPhone, or was it the MacBook, when you shut the lid, it actually physically disconnects the mic, supposedly, that is better, right, than a device that doesn't do that. But it's to me, it's like the TSA at the airport. It's mostly there to make you feel good. It's maybe not actually there to protect you.
Security theater.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Kabuki, as Jason would say, Japanese theater. Well, what do you say to somebody who says, yeah, but I have nothing to hide? So what's your most compelling argument for why they should still care?
No, I think they're right. I think they don't have anything to hide. I don't think they have any imagination or any interesting ideas that are against the grain that they wouldn't want to show up in some subpoena or a court document somewhere. I think that they're perfectly fine. They should definitely go and join the $10 trillion cybercrime industry. Please, we need people to participate in that so that they're not coming after me. We need people who have more of their accounts shut down for saying naughty things on the internet. We need more people tracked down because they upset somebody. And these people go to a people search website, of which there are many, and they track them down and they dox them. I agree. You don't need privacy. Just keep doing what you're doing.
I actually usually hear them say that not about themselves. They usually use it as a peer pressure mechanism to say, well, if you're not happy, it means you've got something to hide, right? Like it's often them trying to put the person they're speaking to into a box that they're already in. That's my experience so far, anyway.
So what do I have to hide? Everything.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah. I mean, my dad used to say, hey, that's no disrespect, but that's none of your business, right?
Yes.
And I think it's good if more people say that. I mean, nowadays it's so offensive to say that, and I'm not sure why. Right.
And this is my approach to a lot of things. What you just explained is it's better to have a good offense than a good defense. We don't need to, like people talk about defending Western civilization. I prefer to offend Western civilization, right? Every defense almost always leads to defeat, okay? Who's our famous general from World War II? I think it's MacArthur says, there's no such thing as defense. You only attack and attack and attack some more, right? Every defense is a stepping backward, right? If somebody says, hey, why do you hate trans people? If you say, well, I don't hate trans people, you're defending, you're stepping back. They have the full moral ground. What if I said instead, I don't talk about those things, or you just said, hey, that's stupid, shut up. Or, you can be offensive sometimes, or you can just go on the offense instead of ceding the ground to these people who have an amoeba woke mindset of, hey, I am the on the moral high ground, and I'm going to speak down to you. I say, no, I have a much higher moral high ground, and I'm going to lob my grenades down to you.
Gabriel, I think it's an impressive display, actually, the power of privacy, the fact that you can speak your mind so clearly. Because even though this is my show, right, my and Jason's show, I know for a fact that I feel guarded and that I filter what I say because I know the camera's on. And this is an epiphany I just had just listening to you, right? So I'm sharing this like super unfiltered thought. So kudos to you for.
Should I not talk about trans issues?
No. Anything and everything is fair game with Jason and I. That's the point, right? We love this like intellectually honesty, right? Honest discussion, and doing it in this day and age on the internet publicly, right? Because I mean, we're recording this privately, but it's going to be shared publicly. You just display how well that can work to me. Not showing your face. You have an awesome name, which is very pretty obviously not your legal given name.
Well, hey now, listen. I fully believe that people live into their names, right? If you've ever met a Rebecca, she definitely lives into her name, and that's all that I've done with Gabriel Custodiet is I've lived up to my name. I fully believe that. But to your point, like people don't like what I say, come find me, come shut me down.
Exactly. That's what, exactly.
How are you going to shut me down? I have created from the beginning a platform that is as censorship resistant as you can get. Okay. I have stuff out there on torrents. All right. Come shut me down.
Like I said, kudos. Let's flip it, right? Let's engage in a quick hypothetical. Let's flip it. Imagine a world where people have completely taken back their privacy into their own hands. How do you think that would shape business, government, and social relationships?
That's an interesting big picture question. I don't know. I think that's been the default in society throughout history. It's only recently, for example, that banks require you to come in and show your ID card and all this other sort of thing. In a high trust society, you don't need to have identification. Okay. ID cards are a product of the 20th century. We didn't have ID cards before that. It's amazing to think about. It's amazing to consider. But in a world where people trust each other, maybe they have their local communities, right? This kind of anarchist society, and the founding fathers were about as close to anarchist as you can get and still have a government. So that's kind of what I go back to is the early America. This was a society where you had all these little towns. They had some idea that they were part of a bigger thing called America. And when they went to do business. Oh, hey, you know this guy. You don't need particular information about them. People take their word. People reveal what they want to reveal in a particular situation. That's kind of what privacy is. You're in control of revealing what you want to reveal. And so I think you need some underpinning values. Okay. Jayant Bhandari talks about you need a rational society for all these things to work. And once people are rational, right, and maybe some other things as well, then they naturally create this kind of decentralized, freedom-oriented society. I think maybe that's a requirement. But if that was there, I think that we could have all kinds of privacy and still function entirely perfectly. That's kind of how I think about it.
Gabriel, going back to Jayant, right? I've had many conversations with Jayant, and I always find them enjoyable. He talks about how societies need to be rational, right, to reach for these ideals like privacy. I don't disagree, right? But I also feel like it's a function of how much risk we are as a society, as individuals, as families, right? How much risk are we comfortable to live with or to take on, right? And when people are scared, it's really easy for them to get controlled, right? And I feel like I come from an immigrant background, right? Like I was born in Singapore, but my great grandparents on both sides, one left Europe to go to Australia, another set of great grandparents left China on a one-way ticket to somewhere in Southeast Asia, not knowing where they would land, knowing that they'll never see home again, right? And these were the people that then built these, like you said, these amazing places like the early America or Hong Kong or Singapore, right? But what I'm struggling with now is that how can we, being descendants of these brave people be so scared and be so willing to give everything up now just for this facade called safety, right? And maybe it's not only about being rational, or maybe a rational person has to be courageous. I'm not sure, right? And that's that's the kind of conversations Jayan and I wrestle with. But yeah, do you have any thoughts on why we're so, let's say, I don't want to say we're cowardly. Why are we not as brave as we once were?
Very big questions, and I understand where you're coming from. I don't know that I have a really good answer to that, but let's approach it from this angle. So there are some very technological changes that happen in the 20th century. And I look at the early 20th century, we talk about the rise of big government and corporates getting better with the government and decline of trust in the West and all these sorts of things. We would target the early 20th century as kind of the decline most people do. And there's all kinds of theories about why that is the case. The libertarians will say, hey, government just kind of grew and grew and grew. Now, let's talk about the technological aspect to this, because I agree. You look out in the world and there are a lot of scared people. And so they demand, and they have no problem with these KYC, know your customer laws that indelibly and inexplicably tie our personal identity to every account we have, so that we can't do things anonymously anymore. We can't just rent a car anymore. I have recently been helping people to rent places, and it's so invasive just to apply for a rental house, an apartment, or something like this. In the past, you just say, hey, I can pay for this. I'm not going to mess anything up. If you think that's a problem, I can pay a little bit more of a down payment. But you didn't need to give up your bank statements for the last 6 years, your employment history, right? Your fingerprints, your whatever other nonsense these people are requesting. So how did we get to that point? I do think there's a technological explanation in that. In the 20th century, we have offloaded a lot of things. I'm just kind of thinking on the fly here, so this is probably not a good idea. We have offloaded a lot to technocratic institutions who we've left to kind of automate things. And there's a certain sense in which they have kind of gotten out of hand. And we just kind of trust, hey, we have this whole process, just download this app or sign up for the service, and they will do the vetting. And this is something that I talk about a lot on my platform, which is, what are we talking about when we talk about verification, right? You can't have an account because we couldn't verify you. What exactly are we talking about? Because, okay, you want an ID card? Jason, give me 5 minutes. I can find a legitimate ID card to give them on the darknet. Okay, that's not a problem. What they're really asking for, and I don't think they know what they're asking for, but what they're really saying is, how can we trust you as a customer? And there's no really good way of answering that because, well, anyway, I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but maybe one of my points is that in addition to being a rational society of kind of similar people in a particular area trying to build a society, there are ways in which our technology can get the best of us and kind of encourage this cult of safety, as I call it, and help us to kind of automate these things where before we would just go person to person to talk to somebody. Because we have the distance of the internet, we kind of build these entire industries, which are themselves kind of verification industries that certainly participate in this decline of trust in society. That wasn't a great answer. That's the best I got for the moment.
No, I thought it was a very good answer. The phrase pops into my head once again. If you are willing to sacrifice freedom for your security, you deserve neither. And I think what just occurred to me is you will also receive neither, right? Because I think security to that degree that's currently, I guess, I don't know, it's like allegedly being pursued by, I say Western governments because I spent time in Europe and in the US. I don't know much beyond these two, although these are very large places. Real security doesn't really exist in my mind. So unless you can own your own life in a way that we've described here, there is nobody. I operate on the assumption that nobody's going to come to save me. It's just me, maybe my close family, like my wife, my kids, like I can definitely trust them. And I try to cultivate, good friendships to build trust locally. But outside of that small circle, I don't think it's not anybody's job either to come and save me, right? I feel completely comfortable, actually most comfortable when I can rely on myself in that small tribe, I guess, of mine. And so this whole idea of like, oh, these big institutions are going to look out for you. I'm like, yeah, right. As long as it's convenient for them, right?
I think Gabriel
I,
was mentioning
yeah.
like H.G. Wells, right? Top down. And
Yeah.
I think, Lovis, for a lot of us, me included, I see the world the way you do. We're more bottom up people. And I guess
Yeah.
Gabriel is as well, right? And the funny
Yeah.
thing is,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
sorry, I just want to say the funny thing is, I noticed that for those top down types, right, they actually view even their closest friends, I think, with certain suspicion, right? Like they would trust the system more or the institutions more than the close friends that they eat with, work with, play with, right? Whereas for me, these institutions are there to do a certain job, but I'm always suspicious, right? I'm always because they're run by people just like you and I. So I don't understand the concept of the state, for example, being, let's say, morally better than the average person you meet on the street, right? Because they're run by average people, or some would argue less than average people in many cases, right? So I don't, but I think the top down types, right, the H.G. Wells of the world, they have to believe somehow that these institutions know better, right?
Yeah. I have a few thoughts on this cult of safety coming out from this angle instead of my previous angle. So, and if you think about it, like your neighbor's making a bunch of noise next to you, and they seem like to be out of control. Are you more likely to go over there and talk to them, or maybe like report them to the homeowners association or the apartment complex or the police? A lot of people are more likely to kind of go to the intermediary instead of dealing with it person to person because that's the easy thing to do. And so it's a system that does feed off of itself in that, hey, we have offloaded all these things to these centralized governmental institutions. Well, now we don't have to worry about our neighbor's welfare. We have the welfare system. And so we just kind of, hey, these other people are taking care of that. And obviously, that means that these things take on a life of their own and they build up and they get worse and worse. But this cult of safety is, I mean, I think we understand this is a ridiculous concept. And I tell people to be as dangerous as they can at all times because so called safety has its own immense risks, right? You think of New Zealand. Let's go to New Zealand during COVID. And the prime minister, Jacinda, whatever her name was, she basically came out and said, we cannot lose a single human life. That was her policy. Shut down everything, lock down. We cannot lose a single human life. Now, let's say you do that. How many lives have you lost or diminished from shutting your borders down? Okay, you shut down your commerce, businesses shut down. How many people killed themselves? How many people lost their income? How many people became alcoholics as a result? How many people lost their lives from not working out and having medical treatments and all the rest? There's no such thing as safety. Right? The world is not a safe place. The world is a dangerous place. And the people who pursue safety as an end in itself are the most dangerous people of all. Safety is an Aztec goddess who demands more and more sacrifices in the name of the cause. So I think we can kind of understand that, but it's easy to say that, and it's a lot more difficult to implement it. And I want to bring up one other very controversial thing. We go back 100 years. What happens? Well, women get the right to vote in the West, and they become a bigger influence in politics in the world. Women are much less risk averse than men are. So you can easily see the kind of motherly impulse in somebody like Jacinda saying, hey, these are all my children. I'm going to protect them. We can't have any risk whatsoever. Men are the risk takers. And as they have had a incredibly diminished role in the world, and by the way, even the men who are there are quite feminized, we see that risk has become much less of an appetite for people in the West over the last 100 years. I think this is a big component to it as well.
And
Yeah.
that safety aspect at all costs, right? That I love that Aztec goddess. I'm gonna use that. I'm gonna use that from now on because, you could say, hey, to make sure that we don't lose anyone to this virus, it means I can give you this experimental drug 10 times a day because I got told this will save you from this virus, right?
Hey, Jason, I for the safety of my platform, I need you to give me your real ID and your real name to use the service. Oh, don't worry, that's going to be in a protected third party. Oh, that third party got breached. Now your information is on the dark net. Now your enemies can come and find you. But hey, safety.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Lots to think about, Gabriel. Blown my mind a little bit, I'm going to be honest with you. So I guess we're approaching the hour mark, or we tend to not want to make these things too long, as people's attention spans are, like their desire for privacy, pretty small. I just came up with that.
Fair enough.
So just a couple of closing questions, if you don't mind. So just to recap really quick, if you could give somebody just starting out on their privacy journey, just the key piece of advice, like maybe the top 3, what would that be?
Privacy begins with being in control of your data. Eric Schmidt, the former Google CEO, said in 2003 that all of human endeavor had produced X amount of data throughout its entire history up to 2003. Humanity was now producing something like 5 times that amount every few days. Okay. So, and this is a 20-year-old quote. Your data is part of your personality. We have to interact with the world, with the internet, all these sorts of things. Privacy begins with being in control. Be in control of your data. Start understanding what you need to do to use a service. Do you need to sign up? Do you need to give an email? Where are your accounts? Okay. Get a password manager. A password manager will help you to organize your accounts. It will help you to see all the things that you're using. You can start to delete some of these things you don't need. You'll start to see that, hey, I have all these accounts. Maybe I can use services that don't require accounts. You'll get into the free and open source software movement as a result. You start to have all of your files in a single location. Maybe Dropbox isn't the best place since Dropbox is scanning all of your documents for evidence of whatever they're looking for, right? Maybe you can have more things offline and you store all of your documents on your computer in front of you. And you say, hey, that's dangerous. I need to back these up right away. So then you start to back them up in an appropriate offline way. So privacy begins with being in control of your data. And once you do that, you're going to feel a great catharsis. Hey, I don't have as many emails coming into my inbox because I'm not signing up for all these services. Maybe I have a service like a simple login where I can make up email addresses on the fly for newsletters and things of this sort. So I'm not giving them my real email address. So as a result of being in control of your data, you will start to naturally take the privacy journey. I think become a better minimalist, become better organized, have a greater picture, a greater view of the whole, and start to understand some of the systems that you're going to have to undercut if you actually want to start the real privacy journey.
Very good. Thank you. It's very actionable. I much appreciate it. So in the same line, what's a question you wish more people would ask about privacy but rarely do?
Good question. Don't have a great answer, but what I will say is how to have physical privacy. A lot of people focus on the digital privacy, and this is where you go down the rabbit hole a little bit, but there's a lot of value in having physical privacy as well. Your physical body, where you go to sleep at night, is the thing you should be protecting most. For me, I'm extreme. I practice what I preach. My home address, the place where I go to sleep at night, I don't even know what it is. All right. I saw it once at the beginning. I don't know what it is. I don't receive any packages here. I've never written down or shared that home address to anyone, any service, anybody, for any entity, for any reason. So I do think people should be wary about their own physical privacy, starting with your home address. Easy things you can do. Get a post office box. Have things shipped there. Use that as an address for many, many things in your life. Have your Amazon packages sent to maybe a Amazon locker. Very simple thing to do. Start being cautious of giving that address out willy-nilly. A lot of people do not actually need your home address. For example, I went to the dentist recently. They give me the iPad. They say they need all this stuff. They're getting my cash. I'm going to pay them cash. They did not get my real name. They did not get my real address. I just put stuff in. Okay. I just put stuff in. For a phone number, maybe they do need to give you a notification. Maybe they don't. If they don't, then they get a fake phone number. If they do need it, maybe they'll get one of my burner phone numbers. So they certainly didn't get my home address. There are a lot of things that you use that you don't need to give this information. So just have a little bit of pushback, right? Just people asking for your information, especially your home address. Just have a little bit of pushback. Do I need to give this? Can I just leave it blank? Do I really need to give my home address? That's an important thing that more and more people should consider, especially in this age of doxing, and which is sharing somebody's home address online as a way to threaten them and things of this sort. But there's many other smaller reasons why you wouldn't want to have that done as well. So focus on the physical privacy as well.
Awesome. Jason, I don't want to keep you from asking any closing questions.
No, actually, if we're at the end, right, I'd just like to ask Gabriel if you'd like to share with our audience, if there's anything in particular he'd like to close with, and also if there are any projects that you'd like to highlight. And yeah, let people know where they can find you.
Let me start with the shill part of that first, and then let's see if I have any closing thoughts. So I have a podcast. It's called the Watchman Privacy Podcast that people can track down wherever they listen to podcasts. And I have a website called escapethetechnocracy.com. I have privacy tutorials, books. I wrote an intellectual history of a lot of the stuff I'm talking about. So I generally talk about interesting things that are more than just the really boring privacy topics. Okay. On my show, we talked about how Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, the former director of the Iranian nuclear project, was killed with an AI remote-controlled killer robot using facial recognition that was set up by Mossad and brought in piece by piece to Iran over the course of months. So we do talk about interesting stuff beyond just the regular privacy. I think you'd find value in that. In terms of closing remarks, as you can see by the way I talk, the philosophy is really important. The philosophy really informs the actions that you take. And so it's really important to have that kind of thinking. I have studied a lot of philosophy throughout my life. Great book I'd recommend is called A History of Western Philosophy by Bertrand Russell. It's one of these desert island books. You'll get a good idea of the major thinking that has happened in the West. Remember, before the 20th century, most of the people who were intelligent got into things like philosophy. Okay, so you're reading the most intelligent people throughout human history when you study Western philosophy in this case. So that's a book I would recommend, and certainly spend the time to read and study the ideas and the fundamental ideas, right? You go back to Homer. He's a better writer than most of the people writing today, right? If not all of them. These people are, it's like T.S. Eliot says. He has this line I'm blanking on the essay, but he says basically, a lot of people say, we know so much more than the old writers, the ancient writers. Okay, we know so much more than they do. Why should we listen to them? And T.S. Eliot says, well, because they are that which we know.
Well, it sparks a memory of what Nassim Taleb said. Is like, how do you write a book that will still be read in 100 years? Well, you write about old concepts, like not old as in outdated, but time-tested, true, have survived over the ages kind of concepts, right? So absolutely,
Yeah.
that embodies the body of knowledge. These are the pillars that the rest of it stands on, right? So great point, great summary. Gabriel, thank you so much. I think it's fair to say you're truly living into your name. I've never really met anybody who has purposely, I guess, set that as an aspiration in their life, right? To name themselves and then to live up to it. As far as I'm concerned, you are. Thank you so much for taking the time and having this very thought-provoking conversation with us. I'll definitely have to go and do some homework now about my own privacy. I feel almost, in some areas, almost embarrassed, right? Because I am deeply familiar with how a lot of these systems work, and I feel like now, after talking to you, I feel almost careless, almost reckless for not closing some of these data leaky doors behind me. So again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for taking the time and the attention. Hopefully talk again soon.
Well, thank you. And thanks to my parents for giving me my name.